Hello and welcome to State of the Economy. Today we have with us an eminent economist, Dr. Parthasarathi Shome, who needs no introduction. More lately, Mr. Shome has been entrusted the task of bringing some clarity to how India should tax foreign entities. He is the chairman of a committee on what is called GAR. Welcome to our show, Dr. Parthasarathi Shome. Since you just came out with a set of recommendations on how India should treat foreign institutional investors in the context of GAR, how we should tax them. Could you just explain to our viewers in very simple terms as to what is this animal called GAR, which is such a subject of heated debate over the last 3-4 months?
Well, GAR is General Anti-Avoidance Rules, and this contrasts with SAR, which is Specific Anti-Avoidance Rules. Okay. So, till GAR was introduced, we had a set of 9, 10, maybe slightly more, a dozen SAR specifications. What they meant was that a very specific type of behavior by a taxpayer can be scrutinized by the tax administrator, and adjustments can be made by the administrator for amount of tax to be paid. GAR goes well beyond that. It is a kind of an overarching instrument which says that what is not covered in SAR under the specified anti-avoidance rules
will be covered under GAR.
Will be covered. So, everything will be covered under GAR. That smacks of avoidance in paying taxes. Now, because it is so overarching, one has to develop very well-defined criteria and rules under which GAR can be invoked. So, in the budget of this year, it was introduced, some explanations were made and some specifications about the rules and criteria, but it was also decided that we will wait for another year, because the rules and criteria as defined, as explained, seems to be very, very large and applicable in many undefined cases.
And give a lot of discretion to the taxman, as it were.
Yes, the lot of discretion to the taxman, and also creating a bit of uncertainty in the case of the taxpayer, even when that was not the intention.
Even that was not the intention, yeah. And the reason why, Dr. Shome, that it became so controversial was that the markets reacted very, very negatively, assuming that the bulk of the foreign institutional investors that come into India in the Indian stock market, they come through Mauritius, nearly 85%, and it was felt that lack of clarity on rules could enable the taxman to then ask any entity coming out of Mauritius, raise suspicion about any entity that is investing out of Mauritius, and start looking at their books. Now, is that issue settled as per your recommendation, as well as per what Finance Ministry has of late been saying? That seems to be settled, isn't it?
No, I mean, we have made our recommendations from the committee. Now, of course, we are waiting for comments on our recommendations, and by the end of September, we will finalize our report, and then it is for the minister to receive those recommendations, and then for government to take action. But however, we are, I think now, what is being recognized is that we've been in the right direction.
So, you in that regard, you made two specific recommendations. One is, you said that the Mauritius Treaty should be respected for what it is. And the other one is, in regard to GAR, you have said that it should be postponed and examined much more carefully.
No, what we have said is that in the case of GAR, we have said that 3-year postponement is good, but the announcement date should be now, should be made. And the reasons being that, first, it's such an overarching instrument that it is better to be very clear from the point of view of the administration what are the conditions under which they will apply, to do some pilot cases and so on and so forth. That's the first thing. And the second thing is because there was no GAR, the foreign investors had entered into arrangements based on their understanding of the then or the current law. And so they have to slowly get out.
Governed by the Mauritius Treaty, etc.
Exactly. And they have to get out of some of these arrangements, and that'll 3 years will give them a good amount of time to do that. And in terms of your second question about Mauritius and also actually Singapore, what we have suggested is that the treaty with Mauritius accepts, we actually renegotiated the treaty and accepts something called the TRC or the Tax Resident Certificate, where the Mauritian government actually certifies that a company satisfies the conditions of residence in Mauritius, and we have accepted that. And similarly, in the case of Singapore, there is a clause in our treaty with them called limitation of benefit. So that, which means basically if they spend about 200,000 Singapore dollars over 2 years, then in Singapore, then that is a unit established there, and we accept it. So our view was that when you have a treaty, in order to really ensure that the conditions of certainty and non-risk are met in the conventional sense with other countries, we cannot abrogate a treaty in that way. We can revisit we cannot abrogate it in the sense of we cannot just suddenly say we will keep the treaty but not this thing just by diktat. So we have suggested, if need be, you renegotiate the treaty, however difficult that be, but while the treaty is there, we should continue to accept these things.
Dr. Shome, what really surprises me is there are other countries which have also implemented GAR or GAR-like set of rules like UK, etc. Now, it's only in India that there was this panic that this would lead to opening up of arbitrarily the taxman would go after FIIs, try to look at their books merely on suspicion and try to figure out what kind of money is coming in. Now, this suspicion, there was more panic in India. Is it because of a general mindset that the Indian tax authorities tend to sort of enjoy far more discretionary powers than do their counterparts in some of the more developed countries? Is that one of the problems?
No, that's a very pertinent point. First, however, the UK has been discussing GAR for several years without having as yet installed them. So there was an expert committee which took a year and a half to give the report, after which HMRC, the tax department, worked on it and consulted on its own, and in their 2012 budget, they have placed the tax department's recommendations on GAR in Parliament, and there's another year of consultation based on the expert committee and the tax department, and then in 2003, so it is more than 4 years that they will have spent when it comes into being. And in the US, they don't have GAR as such, but they have more or less like SAR, as that's why I mentioned SAR. Now, South Africa has recently introduced, but they have not yet applied it in any strong manner, but they are being very reticent and
so other economies also have
absolutely.
We'll discuss this in greater detail, but after a small break, please stay with us. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are having a conversation with Dr. Parthasarathi Shome, who's chairing a committee on GAR as also on foreign taxation, how India should tax foreign entities, Vodafone type of entities. Dr. Shome, we were discussing the principles underlying how foreign entities should be taxed. Now, the reason why the whole debate about GAR came up was a meeting in G20 where there was a commitment by countries that a lot of capital flows into countries which are dubious in nature, or which are black money in nature, should be captured by various countries for the benefit of collecting more taxes and for the benefit of their own running their social programs, etc. Now, where is this black money project, in the sense that there is a suspicion that a lot of money that comes into India through Mauritius is money belonging to Indian entrepreneurs themselves or Indian private account holders who do business abroad. Now, where does that stand in this whole debate now?
See, that again, I'm not saying that doesn't occur.
But does it occur more in India?
Well, there are also, for example, in the UK, there are many unaccounted for accounts in Switzerland and Liechtenstein and so on.
I think UK and Germany had an agreement, had a deal with
right.
Swiss government, where they just took 30% of that and repatriated it back to those countries, right?
I mean, they took a portion which is their legitimate right of the taxes
right.
based on the account. So they didn't go into the, UK at least didn't go into the details of the names and so on. They said what is due to us in terms of the monetary component we want back. And so that was agreed upon. But we...
Can India do something like that?
Well, I would certainly recommend it, but I think I heard the argument that, you know, we can't go half the way, we need all the names and we need the names of accounts and so on and so forth. Well, you know, it's a call of the policy makers, but I think that some countries go for the practical solution, and if we need the resources in the country, we have to...
Yeah, why not? If we get 30% of all the money that Indians have abroad,
that's 30% being the tax. The tax money would be about 30%. Let's say on that basis.
Roughly,
So, so that's the point. And if you really look at it, only today, because of the money laundering, as you say, and so on, we are taking the names of people and who have assets abroad. But historically, especially in those countries where capital accounted of the balance of payments is liberalized, you can invest anywhere in the world. You don't have to. But in our country today, for example, from this year, we are now required to report worldwide assets. So it's not an easy thing to do, especially for middle class people, you know, who have. So, but we are doing that.
You would recommend that we follow the strategy that UK and Germany.
Yes, I would certainly.
Get our money back.
Yeah, that would be my view, that we have to do that. We need the resources. Other countries have done it, and for good reason.
Especially at this stage when we need to run so many of our social programs. And revenues are not exactly on the up these days, with GDP having declined.
Of course, there's another argument that, you know, the facility or the ease with which UK or Germany could negotiate that with the Swiss government, we may not. But on the other hand, I was there at HMRC and I've seen it was not an easy process, and I've got I do not anticipate why such a large economy such as India would have any problem. Yes.
India is seen as a rising economic story. If you are part of G20 and if you are the high table, I guess you could also do a similar agreement as did Germany and UK with the Swiss government. But do you think in this context we are constrained also partly by an earlier Supreme Court order which discouraged the government from offering amnesty schemes or anything that resembles something like an amnesty? Would you categorize this as somewhat of an amnesty scheme?
I would differentiate the two. In fact, this solution is not giving amnesty.
Because they're paying 30% tax.
That's right. We are not telling them exactly they're paying 30% tax, and also it doesn't absolve the taxpayer, the potential taxpayer, or the persons who are having their accounts abroad, not coming back to government and telling them, because now it is law. Income tax law requires you to declare all your foreign assets all over the world, real and intangible and tangible property. So it is not an amnesty at all. But government is recouping some of the loss or most of the lost revenue from it. So it shouldn't, in my view, conflict with the Supreme Court.
There's also a feeling that the FII route that we have at the moment for foreign entities to invest into the Indian stock market by itself is partly a reason for some of the money that goes out of the country and comes back through various participatory notes and through various other vehicles. Now, there has been debate about whether there can be stricter know your customers norm, or whether the end where the money is actually coming from can be traced, whether the FIs themselves can be held responsible to find out who the end investor is. Are those things on the table, or are they difficult to?
See, the thing is that apart from whether they are difficult or not, we have to follow certain international norms and what is practical. Now, if you really look at the final investors, many of them can be individual investors and likely to be small, likely to be large, and there are mutual funds and others that come through, and they come through some kind of a funnel which is a holding company which may be in Mauritius or in Singapore, and because of their conditions and local laws and facility to operate and so on and so forth. Now, in most countries that are comparable, today capital gains tax coming from those kinds of investments is zero. Exactly. They don't even follow up who they are. Now, in our country, the problem is we believe that this money is going for a kind of a round tripping, that it is getting going out without paying tax, getting washed, and then coming back, and then because of the capital gains tax being zero from Mauritius, they are not paying any tax at all. But then the problem is at the point where the money is leaving, not when it is coming back.
So you should attack it at the point of leaving.
Yes, yes, and there is a white paper on black money, and we should see what we are doing and what not. That whatever we are not doing, and we should attack it at that point.
Actually, you're right. Most advanced economies do not tax, I think, foreigners.
They don't tax non-residents.
They don't tax non-residents.
They don't tax non-residents on capital gains in the US,
Probably
UK.
was too cumbersome to do that.
Right. And in the case of UK, the taxing of non-residents is even less than in the US. They have something called a non-domicile.
Is that why you've also recommended that short-term capital gain tax be done away with? It's much simpler to do away with it, because as it is, we are not collecting much out of that. So is that the logic that you?
Yeah, I mean the logic is international comparability. We are competing for these funds, and for a small amount of revenue, a huge distortion is being created, at least in the perception of the investors. They don't want to come through the tax route and all that for a small amount of money that is being asked for them. And so we should be finding this kind of revenue if we need, through the, let's say, the Swiss route or the STT or taxpayer base expansion and so on and so forth.
Are you also doing this, Dr. Shome, because you feel that that India will be a big net capital importer, whether you like it or not, over the next 10 years, to feed its massive infrastructure projects, etc. We will need foreign savings. So is that also at the back of your mind when you recommend that let's have a simple system, let's not tax non-residents or foreigners on at least on capital gains, so that you encourage more capital flows into the country? Is that also a consideration?
Well, not just in the future. I mean, one is looking at it today at more than 4% of GDP current account deficit.
Exactly.
We need the
not future, I'm saying the next 6 months. 1 year. Exactly, So we need to balance that balance of payments. Current account deficit of 4% of GDP.
But I must say that as far as the GAR committee was concerned, that was the context in which the backdrop in which we operated. But we looked at it very much from a tax point of view to make it tax neutral within our tax structure and tax laws, and to make it comparable with foreign experience, with international experience. So we looked at that, but certainly it was not completely in vacuum. Certainly the overall
there is a larger context,
very much.
There's a global economy, a slowdown, capital flows getting disrupted.
Absolutely.
We'll discuss more of this, but after a small break. Please don't go away and keep watching Rajya Television. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are having a very interesting conversation with Dr. Parthasarathi Shome. Now, you are also, Dr. Shome, looking at how India should, in future, treat Vodafone type of tax cases where there's a merger between two entities which are registered outside of India, and yet when they merge or when they acquire one another, the underlying asset which changes hands lies in India. Now, how do you look at this? Because purely from a rational taxation point of view, there is a view that when underlying assets are in India, tax should be collected in India. How do you view this?
Yeah, there are two issues here. One is that if all transactions are taking place outside of India, if there are two large entities, you can identify them. But if they are not such large entities, it is done through shares, then it is kind of not so easy to do. But that is more a kind of a technical or matter. But the other matter is that there are countries that have what is called indirect transfers, where all the transactions are taking place outside, and only the underlying asset is in India. But there can be, for example, let us say the seller is outside, but the seller is selling it to another one outside, but not through a holding company, so that but directly the Indian asset. Then it is very easy. Then you do tax. So the issue therefore is, just because there is a holding company or something of that nature, and the investor from outside who owns the holding company selling the holding company abroad to another entity, another investor abroad, it's all abroad. So it's a mirage in a way. So there is a good reason to believe that, well, just because there is a holding company, we sort of give up our tax revenue. But if there was no holding company, if it was we would. But while it is very true that it is a kind of a mirage, but today's international norms seem to move in the direction of the holding company as entity. And if we look at the Supreme Court judgments on this matter, on Vodafone and so on, and even abroad, you see that they go for this legal fiction, because of course they are the top-notch legal minds. They are empathetic to the legal fiction. So our challenge is really to look at that, and then the government literally kind of countered the arguments that the Supreme Court made, and said those are the conditions which we will set aside when we define the underlying assets that are to be taxed in India. So our committee, together we are putting our heads together to come to some kind of a close look, and we have had many consultations from big minds in this area, in this field, and this is the moment where we are looking at it.
But do you think the direct tax code, with which you were also associated when Mr. Chidambaram as finance minister actually wrote it himself with your help, and when you were advisor with him, will help solve some of these issues, because it's a brand new income tax act, as it were. So will it clarify?
Well, the thing is that I must say that I shouldn't say that I myself only worked, but they were all with him. I did, but there was a joint secretary who worked with him. There was a member of the CBDT who worked with him. So at least 4 of us that I know worked, and Mr. Chidambaram was the brain behind it. But the issue was that in the indirect transfer case, this Vodafone type of case, which is called indirect transfer, there was mention, but as I recall, there was a very short mention that if a transfer takes place directly or indirectly, then what will be done. But today it has become much more complex, and but the very important point is, when I look at the 2009 DTC and when I look at the 2012 DTC, they are so far quite different in many ways. And since I was associated with the first one, I shouldn't comment on the second.
I know, but how different?
No, for example, let's say in the case of GAR, there was the issue of the main purpose being a tax benefit of an arrangement would invoke GAR, but it became main or one of the main purposes. Okay. This is just going to be a minute example.
Which gives a lot of discretion to the taxman.
So, it became wider. Probably it was perceived that today the world has become more complex, but I think that it has to be revisited with some perspicacity and really look at it. So, there are things of that nature.
But there were also, I am told, there were chapters specifically drafted on simplification of procedures, because tax is as much about procedure as about the rate.
Absolutely.
Now, some of those, probably because they took away the taxman's powers, discretionary powers. So, subsequently, I guess some tax authority did away with some of those provisions. Is that also?
I mean, I can't, but the thing is that the bottom line is, I do feel really that one has to go back to the 2009 one. Okay. Yeah. Not because
which I think the finance minister has indicated. He said that he would revisit DTC.
Very good. I really think that should be done, because and seen what is relevant in today's context. And that's why even for GAR, we went back to 2009 also. Not that we took everything, we took quite a bit from there. A lot of those relevant ones we are back, but then we have advanced it a little bit more as well.
Thank you, Dr. Shome, for being with us. That's all we have in this edition of State of the Economy. We'll be back soon. Goodbye.